How did you get to New York City?
Well, I moved here when I was just a boy, really. Like after college, I went to school for musical theater, and I came here pursuing a dream of being on Broadway, and ended up making a wrong turn somewhere along the line, ending up in a comedy club. Never really looked back since.
How did that transition happen? Was that immediate or fairly quickly when you were pursuing the Broadway path?
Well, I mean, I was doing okay as an actor. I was, doing some regional theater, some tours and stuff like that. Never did get quite to Broadway, but I did some stuff off Broadway and everything. So when I first told my agent at the time, the late Michael Hardig, R.I.P. legend, that I was going to transition into being a stand-up comedian, he said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" Because I was making him some money. And then, of course, when you start in comedy, there is no money.
Yeah.
So I had saved some, and then I was ready to kind of, build that transition.
Were you always known as the funny guy?
Not really. I wasn't like class clown or anything like that. I have two brothers, and we always used to crack each other up, but I didn't know if that would necessarily translate to a group of strangers in a basement somewhere. But certainly I always admired comedians, and I was doing an off-Broadway production of Godspell where I was playing Jesus, if you can imagine. And, I had obviously a huge role. I had like 10 solos, and I'm doing all this acting, and there weren't really any funny parts. The story of Jesus of Nazareth is not a hilarious one. But during intermission, that's when we all used to crack each other up. And it was actually the guy who was playing Judas in that production that suggested, he said, you're kind of quick on your feet. You can always come up with something witty. You should try stand up. And my reaction was, oh, I could never, because I was used to having a costume and a director and a script, and with stand-up, we have none of that.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe I owe that guy 30 pieces of silver.
Did you have an instinct that you could do it? How did you make the decision to make that transition?
Yeah. So in the acting world, when you want to learn how to do something, you take a class.
Yeah.
So if you want to learn stage combat, you take a stage combat class. You want to be a commercial actor, you take a commercial class. So to me, the natural thing to do was to find a stand-up comedy class. So I found some, guy who had never actually done comedy himself that was teaching a stand-up comedy class, and he basically was teaching out of a book. The book was Judy Carter's Comedy Bible, and basically the same lessons that are in that book was what I learned in this class. And then we got up in front of our classmates and tried things, and then he would give us notes like a director. So this man had experience in theater. He had been a director and he had coached actors before, but he never actually did stand up himself. But yeah, I learned what's in that book, and then that was kind of what got me started. And then I made my debut like at 4:30 in the afternoon at Caroline's Comedy Club, R.I.P. Caroline's. And it was from there, that was kind of the beginning for me. I was hooked. I wasn't very good, but I knew that I wanted to try to get good at it.
Did you know from the beginning that you wanted to do this full time? How did you survive financially at that period of your life?
Yeah. So like I said, when I was doing a lot of acting, I had put some money away. Someone advised me very early in my career, when you're making money, pretend you're not.
Yeah.
And when you're not making money, pretend you're really not. And that's kind of the mantra for actors and, I guess artists probably in general here in New York, is just, you always have to save for a rainy day because that rainy day is coming. So I was kind of in a position where I could take that time and work on stand up and not necessarily have to get a survival job or anything like that. And then in the beginning, I was still doing some acting. So my big role that I played in the theater was I kind of look like Buddy Holly. So I was on tour with the Buddy Holly story for like 2 years. And, some of those places paid okay. So I was able to kind of put away some savings. But I went through it pretty fast in that first year of doing stand-up because in the beginning of stand-up, you actually pay to play. You don't get paid. You have to pay just for the privilege of taking the stage. And so, the finances kind of dried up quickly. And then I was back doing theater, kind of like sucked me back into that old world. But that just confirmed what I already knew, which is I didn't want to be in that world anymore. I was in a comedy, and the director of this comedy had no sense of humor. And so it was horrible because I said, well, if he would just let me say my lines this way, I know the audience would laugh. But in theater, you have to listen to the director. In comedy, they just tell you what time to be there and what time to get off stage. And as long as the audience is laughing, nobody tells me anything. And I like that.
Did you, when it's because you had some money, I'd love to hear about the initial few months of you hitting the ground running and trying to make this work. Are you up on stage every night of the week as much as you can? What do you remember about those early months? Yeah,
those days are really fun. Like when you first start out in comedy, it's all so new and you're really excited. So I was doing every open mic in town. I was making friends with all the other comedians that were at my level. Many of them are still good friends of mine now and have had tremendous success, way more than I've ever dreamed of. But then I also have to imagine and remind myself that there were plenty of people that I started with who don't do comedy at all anymore. So whatever level you're at, it's not useful to compare yourself with, like when I started out, one of my, peers, if you will, would have been Michelle Buteau, who's now a huge star. She makes movies and everything. Joe DeVito was another one. And, he's got a great career going. And then there are plenty of others whose names you don't know because they just stopped, you know? So in a sense, there's a bit of success. I feel like I've had success just because I never quit.
Yeah.
I might not be as famous as some of my friends, but I also know hundreds of aspiring comedians that would trade spots with me in a heartbeat.
For sure.
So I try not to get too caught up in all of that. I do it because I love it. One of my favorite words in English is amateur. Amateur means love, right? It's from the Latin for love. And so I never want to say that I'm no longer an amateur comedian because that would mean I'm not doing it for the love. I don't care, what gigs I get or what opportunities come from it, whether they ask me to do another special or anything. I'm just here because there's nothing I'd rather do than get up there and try to make everybody laugh and see how it goes.
You mentioned Caroline's RIP. I'd love for you to tell any details that still resonate with you about what the scene was like in New York when you were first going after it. What were the popular clubs? Who was on the scene at that time that people might know about? What do you remember that's interesting?
Yeah, so in my early days, a lot of the places I used to perform no longer exist, like Caroline's, which I didn't really get to perform at very much in the beginning. It was just part of the tuition for that class I took was you got to do an afternoon show there. Comics was a great venue downtown where I used to perform. There was another place that I'm trying to remember the name of. I think it was called Gramercy Comedy Club, and it was attached to a strip club. And so they paid us $30 a night and free tickets to go get a lap dance at the I'm not kidding. But yeah, there was quite an underground scene then. This would have been like, Janine Garofalo, Todd Barry, and all of those guys coming up. Those were the ones that I looked up to when I was first starting out. And Laurie Kilmartin, another one. There was kind of an underground scene, places like Surf Reality and Luna Lounge that, obviously don't exist anymore. But there was kind of like there was comedy and then there was alternative comedy. And I just wanted to get on any stage I could, anytime I could. I never said no to anything. I performed in laundromats, pizza places, sushi bars. It didn't matter. Anytime somebody gave me an opportunity to get on stage, I knew it would make me a better artist. So I just always took every opportunity.
The goal at that point, I don't know if you had them, but was it as simple as I love this thing, I want to keep doing this thing? Or did you have loftier financial goals, professional goals? Where was your head at that point?
Yeah, I mean, going back to amateur, I just wanted to do it. I loved it. It was my new toy that I was playing with. I was kind of at the end of my rope with theater. and I knew I wanted to perform. I actually started out as a musician and I was a singer and I did all these different types of performing. But once I first took the stand-up comedy stage, I said, I'm home. I'm finally where I belong. And so I wasn't really I wasn't practical, like, oh, my business plan is to, get this much money in this period of time. I never looked at it that way. I was always a starving artist. So I never had any money. I didn't think I would ever get any money. I was like, as long as I can afford peanut butter and Wonder Bread, I'll be fine just doing what I'm doing. And then, once success started to come, it was that was just the icing on the cake. That was never my goal.
I'm fascinated by so many of the artists I've met have said pretty much exactly what you said. And whatever their endeavor is, that sense of like alignment or correctness, or you use the word home. How did you know that? I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you remember about how you knew you had found home.
Yeah. So let me talk about my early days in the theater.
Yeah.
One of the first roles I ever played in high school, I was Curly in Oklahoma. And, Curly's, again, a kind of a leading man, whatever, not really a hilarious character. There are funnier characters in the play, in the script. But there was one scene, I think in high school, we maybe did 3 or 4 performances. And each night when we did the duet between Curly and Judd, poor Judd is dead. And I sing this song where I'm trying to get my, antagonist to imagine his own death. I'm basically trying to convince him to commit suicide. It's a dark play. And it's funny. It doesn't sound funny the way I'm saying it, but believe me, it's funny. And what fascinated me, I didn't realize that at the time, I was like 15, 16 years old, but that was the part that I loved, was the laughs. Everybody laughs when I sing it this way, or when I make that face, or when I maybe say this line a little faster. And I was sort of pre-fascinated by that. And then you fast forward 7 or 8 years later, I was in a Neil Simon play called Laughter on the 23rd Floor, which is about the early days of the Sid Caesar Your Show of Shows, which is kind of the precursor to SNL back in the day. And Neil Simon was one of the writers, Mel Brooks, Larry Gelbart from MASH, and a lot of other comedy legends, Selma Diamond. And so we were playing as an actor, I was playing a comedy writer.
Yeah. And
that script was so funny. And the script is about being funny, where they're trying to doctor the script and say, well, what if we have him do this instead? Or what if, and the process of getting into the role of being a comedy writer, it's like life imitating art. Every night I go up on stage and I'm trying to make the audience laugh at the play that I'm in. And so there are some parallels between being an actor, especially in a comedy, and being a stand-up comedian. But that said, it's 2 completely different jobs. But there are some things that one sort of feeds the other. But I noticed that was the play that I loved doing even more than all the musicals, because it was just about laughs. And that's when I started thinking, maybe that's what I love the most, is the sound of laughter. And then once I could just go for that, man, I was like so happy. I was like, this is where I meant to be all along.
Was there also, when you started doing stand-up performances, a sense of like calm when you were up there? Did you battle nerves, or was part of being home feeling comfortable up there?
Yeah, it was the nervousness that made me comfortable. So that, I know that sounds backwards, but my drug of choice is adrenaline.
Yeah.
I've done skydiving. I drove a motorcycle, bungee jumping, high stakes poker, anything that gets your blood pumping, I'm into. And so this was, once you're in a play and you've done Buddy Holly's story 2,000 times, the adrenaline, it's still more fun than sitting around watching TV. But there's nothing like doing stand-up where it's like you really don't know what's going to happen tonight. And that's what really turns me on.
I've always liked the observation that, nervousness and excitement are often, they're kind of 2 sides of the same coin.
Sure.
The excitement is a positive way to look at nerves, which I think is sort of what you're saying, is it's also exciting.
100%. I mean, when you're on a roller coaster, especially one you've never been on before, and you hear that on the way up, and you're like, this is going to be great. Also,
I'm scared the shit out of me.
Yeah. And that's what comedy is. Definitely.
Did you have people growing up or when you were starting out, you mentioned a couple of names of your contemporaries, but people either from comedy history or people you knew at the time when you were beginning who you really admired? And if so, I'd love to hear why, what it was about them that you really looked up to.
Yeah. So my father was a musician, and back in the olden days, when a big famous comedian would come to town, I grew up in Baltimore, and my father would always get the gig. We need a bass player for Phyllis Diller is going to be headlining at the Lyric Opera House or whatever. And my father would, be in that orchestra. Joan Rivers, Phyllis Diller, the Smothers Brothers, Bill Cosby, and on and on. I can name, so many great comedians that he worked with. And he would come home and tell my brothers and me the jokes, because we couldn't go to the show. We were too young.
Yeah.
So he would, the jokes that he could tell that were appropriate for three young boys, he would share. And so my father was sharing comedy with me in that way. And, back in the day, we had a record player where we had all these comedy albums, whether it was Joan or Phyllis or especially the Smothers Brothers, because they combined comedy and music, which were two things I always loved. And listening to those records and just sort of maybe, Steve Martin was another big one.
Sure.
Maybe getting kind of the rhythm of comedy into my head. It all sort of had an influence over the years. And also being from a very large family, my father had 7 brothers and sisters, and they all thought they were the funniest. Like they competed, to see which one could make their mother laugh the hardest, right? And so it was very natural for me to be like at a big family party with all my uncles, aunts, and cousins, and everybody just being boisterous and outgoing and trying to put smiles on each other's faces. So I can't really point to one particular comedian, but I memorized all those Smothers Brothers songs, a lot of Steve Martin routines, and I hate to say it now, but Bill Cosby was a huge influence. Of course, as a young boy, I had no idea what he was doing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But, the comedy itself stands on its own to this day.
You said, the initial instinct was the love of the work. And then it sounds like some success started coming your way. How did you know, what kind of signs or signals were you getting that you were on the right track, you were going to be able to find work? What do you remember from that time?
Yeah. So when I was in that transition period where I was kind of doing theater as well as comedy, I was in a show in Atlantic City at the Claridge Hotel, and we had a comedian as kind of the intermission. Casino shows, they don't really want to do an intermission. They want to get everybody back to the blackjack table as soon as possible. Yeah. But instead of a break in the show, we had a comedian come and he would do 15 minutes every night. And I never took my break. I always watched that comedian. And his name was Jeff Schilling. He was a writer for Jeff Foxworthy. They were contemporaries. And so he kind of had like a hillbilly act, and he did jokes about we couldn't afford Tupperware, so we used Cool Whip containers and, things like that. Not exactly reinventing the wheel, but the audience enjoyed him, and I became friends with him from being in that show with him. And at the end of that gig, which ran like pretty much all summer, I think it ended like maybe September, he said, I'm going on the road after this, and I have a couple of dates where if you want, you can open for me, because he kind of wanted to take me under his wing a little bit. And that was, I guess, my first break. So we'd go to like Scranton, Pennsylvania to Wisecrackers Comedy Club, and then I would do 10 minutes at the beginning and then introduce whoever the local comedian was that the club had hired, and then I'd go back up and do another 5 minutes after that guy, and everybody would ignore me and go to the bathroom because they knew that I was about to introduce the headliner, which was my friend Jeff Schilling. And then the most valuable part was after the show, because Jeff Schilling loved to go to Denny's, and we would go to Denny's in whatever town we were in, and he gave me notes. And I remember one of the first notes he ever gave me, he's like, Clayton, you're funny, but it's just too many if, ands, and buts. You got to figure out how to say what you're saying a lot faster, or you're never going to get to headline. And I took that very seriously. I started looking at all my material typed out and saying, how many of these words can I actually get rid of and get to the funny part? If I took this word out, does the punchline still make sense? And if the answer is yes, that word is gone.
Being more concise.
Yeah, it's so important in stand-up. The audience is drinking. They don't have time to hear all the little details. They want the good part. So you got to give it to them, or they'll start ignoring you, looking at their phones or talking to each other, or they get distracted. But if you keep them laughing, they literally can't get distracted because they're too busy laughing.
So the feedback you were getting from the comedians was as valuable as being up on stage, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. Because I was so new at that point. I just had taken that one class and then done maybe 50 or 75 open mics. And now I'm like on the road and they're paying me not much. I wasn't making that much, but luckily I had my expenses very low. So I didn't need to make that much in order to get by. And I wasn't getting rich, but I was getting by just from doing these little gigs here, little gigs there. And then I got offered a chance to perform for the prisoners at Rikers Island.
Really?
Yeah. Which was great. It was a really great show.
How did that come about?
So it was a guy that I knew from the open mic circuit, Peter Haywood. And I don't know what his in was with Rikers Island, but he asked me and Jessica Delfino and Eddie Pepitone and a few others to go and entertain the prisoners. And this one was just a wild, I never felt so appreciated. They felt really happy that we were there and that it was basically a reward for good behavior. If you behave yourself in jail, you might get to see a comedy show. But they warned us. They said, do not say anything negative about the warden or about the prison. If you guys do that, we're going to have to stop the show. They told us that on the way in. I was like, okay, so you have a gun. I'm not going to argue.
I just in doing a couple dozen interviews with comedians, I have this made me think of it because of what you've mentioned already during the conversation, is just the power of your network. And it seems like comedians are great, especially in a condensed city like New York, in meeting each other and offering opportunities and socializing. I don't know if there's more you'd like to say about that, but a lot of these opportunities seem to have come from people you know and just getting up in front of people. How important has your network that you formed in New York been as you look back in your career at helping you upwards? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, it is the most important thing. I mean, even to this day, I work with Felicia Madison at West Side Comedy Club up on 75th in Amsterdam. Really great comedy club. And she's the booker there. But I've been around longer than she has. And so sometimes I'm the talent coordinator. That's my official title. I basically help with like the newer guys and helping them get pointed in the right direction. We also have a school called Funny Stand Up that's, affiliated with the club and everything. So sometimes she'll ask me, do you know anyone who's right for this? Some casting director reached out and they want, something very specific, like maybe somebody who's under 20 and Palestinian for this role or this. Do we know anybody like that? And, I've opened doors for people because of being in that position. And likewise, I've had doors opened for me early on. Like if I hadn't been in that play, I might never have been able to get some of those early gigs on the road at my level. There were definitely many, many funnier comedians that could have been opening for Jeff Schilling on the road, but I was someone that he knew and that he liked. And that is, I can't overstate the importance of having your crew, your squad, your guys that you roll with, and I see it now. Some of my friends that were always close and now they make movies together, or they travel together. Somebody helped somebody years ago. Nate Bargatze is one of the best for this.
Is that right?
Yeah, he never forgot any favor that anyone did for him coming up. And now, like, if you see who he tours with, it's all the guys that were good to him when he was a New York City resident. Hey, I just got here from Tennessee and I don't know nothing. And we all loved Nate, but there are certain people that were really, helpful to him, like mentoring him and getting him started. And now he doesn't say, oh, forget those guys, I stepped over them to get where I am now. The nice guy that Nate appears to be on stage is exactly who he is.
That's great
off
to hear.
Stage as
That's
well.
awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was a point at which you felt like, because a lot of the comedians I've interviewed their goal is to tour or to be on tour, even if it's, not being the headliner, just being out there. Was there a point where you felt, or you remember thinking, I'm either on my way or I've really made it? You're making a living now as a comedian. What do you remember about that?
Yeah, it's so interesting. This concept of making it, I was doing this big tour in Sweden with Joe DeVito and Jessica Kurson. We're going around Sweden and we're doing all these shows. And at some point, Jessica, who I think is one of the greatest comedians who ever lived, she was talking about some of the opportunities that she was having trouble getting. And that's when I realized, because I would give my right arm to trade careers with Jessica Kurson, but she's also looking up at whoever's the next rung up on the ladder from her. Like, why don't I get to do this? I would like to do that. I would like to do this. And that's something that is both good and bad. It's bad in that in some ways, as a comedian, you always feel like you're not getting what you deserve. And so we all kind of have a victim complex or something. But on the other hand, it's good because it drives us to keep growing as artists and to keep writing and to keep creating and keep trying to find new platforms. And that's really important because you don't want to ever get stagnant as a stand-up.
Was going on tour for you early in your career what you were looking up at? I find what you say to be true in almost every area of life, that human beings are kind of by nature insatiable. And we're all, whether it's in wealth or in status or in professional advancement, it's human nature to always be looking up at people, even if you are so far ahead of where you ever dreamed you might be 5 years ago. And I think it can be very helpful to try to push back against that a little bit. And I like to read my old journal entries, for example, from 5 or 10 years ago, to help me with that, but it's impossible. It's just, I think, baked into the human animal. When you were starting out, was getting on tour one of those things as you were looking up at other people that was the goal, or did you have other things you were trying to achieve? Yeah,
I mean, I think my only goal was just to see how funny I could get. Honestly, I know that sounds like so stupid because at some point, what are you trying to do with this?
Yes.
Is a natural, normal human question for you to ask me. But I never once thought about that, possibly to my own detriment. Like I never tried to get in front of agents and managers and see if I could get TV spots or, try to make friends with this famous person so that I could maybe go on tour with her or him. I just wanted to. I believed in my own naive young heart. I believed that if I got incredibly funny, all the doors would open, which isn't necessarily how things work, but that's what I thought at the time. So I see the newer generation of young up and coming comedians now, and they're all trying to get an audition. They're all trying to kick the door in. They want to be on TV. They want to do this. They want to do that. And they're not funny yet. And for me, I think that's also a mistake. Like you only have one chance to make a great first impression. Maybe I waited too long. And so I could have gotten opportunities earlier if I had been more aggressive and trying to, kick those doors down or whatever. But I just didn't want to fall flat on my face when the bell rang. I wanted to make sure that I was good enough that if they put me on a show where I had to go like, let's say after Christian Finnegan and before Ted Alexandro, would I be okay? Or would it be like, it was funny, then Clayton was on, then it was funny again? That was my fear. I wanted to make sure I could, I didn't want to be in the big leagues if I was just going to strike out every time I got up to bat. And that's the way I looked at it. I just focused on the art. I went to college for theater and music, and they don't teach you like how to make a living. They teach you how to do theater and music. And so that was kind of what I knew. And that was my approach to comedy. I had no business sense whatsoever.
Do you still feel like that's the right advice? If there were a beginner comic coming to you for advice and they were kind of looking at two paths, one is, cutting their teeth on open mics and grinding and trying to improve, or coming up with these crazy strategies for, as I think you said, kicking the door down. What would you say? Do you think in modern life, with modern technology, that's still the wise strategy, tactic?
Well, I think it depends on what your goal is and what's in your heart. Do you want to be able to take tremendous pride in your work? Do you want people to leave the theater saying, that was the best comedy show I've ever seen? Or do you want to just have financial success or fame? Because the way things are today, and I'm not lamenting this, it's just the facts.
Yeah.
You don't have to be funny. You have to have followers. If you are an Instagram creator or a TikTok star, the clubs don't even care if you're going to get 3 laughs in the hour that you're on stage, because they know that you'll fill the seats. And at the end of the day, a comedy club is a place where drinks are sold.
Yeah.
That happens to have a stage and a microphone. And so I understand that. And again, I'm not lamenting it. I'm not saying, oh, in the good old days, you had to be funny. I'm not being that get off my lawn, old man, I'm just saying the advice that I would give somebody that's newer would be based on that person's, what that person's priorities are. I think nowadays it's very important that you have a strong social media presence or a podcast or a YouTube channel or something else, because even today I've been headlining for a decade and they still ask my manager, how many followers does he have? What's his social media presence like? And it's like, well, don't you want to watch his clip? Yeah. You want to see if he can get laughs? No, we don't care. Ideally you can do both, but if they have to pick one, they're going to pick those followers 100% of the time.
You said you've been headlining for 10 years. I don't know if you remember this. I bet you do. The first year or first moment you actually were the headliner. And if there is a story there, which I'm guessing there is, I'd love to hear about what you remember about that moment.
So I was directing a production of Buddy, the Buddy Holly story, in Mesa, Arizona, at a little dinner theater there. So I was kind of helping these young actors put together the show that I was so intimately familiar with, right? And we had a night where we didn't have rehearsal. We didn't have anything special going on. And I mentioned to a few of the guys from the show, I'm going to stop by the comedy club in Scottsdale tonight. Place doesn't exist anymore, but it was called the Comedy Spot. And I walked in with a few of the actors from the play and I said, hey, I'm Clayton Fletcher. I'm a comedian from New York City. These guys will come to the show tonight if you give me 5 minutes on stage. And, any club in the world will probably let you have 5 minutes on stage if you bring 3 paying customers, right? So not any club in the world, but a club at this level. Yeah. I mean, don't try that at the biggest club in town. But, if you go to the B room in any city, you'll probably get at least a few minutes of stage time. So yeah, these guys from my play, they sit down and they're like, oh, what's this going to be like? They knew me as the director that had kind of, been known for this one musical, Buddy Holly. So I get up there and I can't explain what happened. And I got the biggest crowd reaction that night. One of the biggest that I've ever gotten, even to this day. I just remember this audience laughed at my setups, at my punchlines, at the pauses between my setups and my punchlines, at my ad libs, it seemed like I could do no wrong. To this club owner, on that 1 5-minute performance, it probably looked like, this is the best comedian who ever existed. I just had a magical night. And so when I left, he said, I'd love to have you come and headline for me sometime. And I didn't say, I only have 28 minutes of material. I said, I would love to do that. And we scheduled it. And I live in New York, but I made my way to Arizona. And I had a hotel, and I think the meals were paid for, and they paid me, not a whole lot of money, but to me, it was definitely enough to make it worth my time and energy to be there. And I just played the role of professional headlining comedian, although I was still, a work in progress myself at that time. The shows that weekend went great, and I recorded one of them on my own with something called a Sony mini disc recorder, which doesn't exist anymore. And that recording became my first album, Clayton Fletcher, Actually Funny, because there was a joke in the set where a guy ruined the compliment by using the word actually in the middle of it. It's not nice to hear, hey, you were actually funny. That hurts, So yeah. And from then on, I was able to tell people, I'm a comedian, I'm a headliner. I worked at the Comedy Spot in Scottsdale, Arizona. And, then I started getting more headlining gigs under my belt. It's almost like they all wait until somebody else says you're good enough, and then they all say you're good enough. I didn't have any TV credits or anything. Really, I think I'd done like a soap opera and Law and Order, but I hadn't done stand up on TV. Yeah.
They all copy each other. It's mimicking.
Yeah,
social proof.
They don't want to take the chance. They're in the position, and I don't mean everybody, but the vast majority of gatekeepers, if you will, they don't want to stick their necks out. They want to see what other people are doing first. I can't tell you how many times I've heard of New York City comedy club owners looking at other comedy clubs' websites to see who the talent is at that club so that they can hire them to work at their club. I don't believe that's the best way to do this. I think that as bookers or gatekeepers or casting directors or anybody like that, you should have your own opinion. You shouldn't need to know that, oh, well, if he's good enough to work at the Comedy Cellar, then he's good enough to work at my club. That may be true, but what about the guy that's not yet at the Comedy Cellar? Don't you want to take pride in discovering someone?
Yeah.
I was in Chattanooga recently. There's a great club there, the Comedy Catch. And we had a little poker game after the show. And I forget who the comedian was that they were talking about. I didn't know who he was. But the owner of that club, she was very proud of something. She said, well, he should come in if he's in town and say hello to me. I'm the first person who ever headlined him. And you could see in her face and in just her inflection, she was proud of that she was the one that kind of discovered this person and gave him his first break. So if he's in town, he damn well better come say hi to me. He owes me, right? And I think that should be the approach that the club owners and bookers have, not just copying each other.
Thinking for themselves.
Think for yourself.
Identifying talent.
If you think somebody's funny, put that person on your stage, even if that person hasn't done television and doesn't have 100,000 TikTok followers. Or, I mean, the audience doesn't care. Maybe if you're some big star, John Oliver comes in, or Al Franken, or somebody like that, right? Okay, that's all. Nikki Glazer's here. Wow, that's really cool, But unless it's somebody at that level, the audience doesn't care whether you've done The Tonight Show or you have been on Comedy Central. They don't care.
It's not going to make you laugh.
No.
Yeah.
No, it might be like, oh, okay, well, that gives him credibility for about 4.5 seconds. And now he needs some punchlines.
Was you becoming a headliner really the tipping point for you to be able to make a comfortable career for you to do your art and not be so damn stressed out all the time about money?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it was kind of a tipping point in a sense. But, you know, you're never really a headliner. You're never really a feature and you're never really an MC. You know, like I was the middle act, the feature at this club called Stanford's in Kansas City. And the headliner was Lynn Koplitz. Brilliant. Really, really funny. Lynn Koplitz. You know, she had plenty of TV credits and, you know, she was a former model and everything, you know. And there was another guy, a local guy that was the opening act or the MC. And so he would introduce me and then Lynn. But on Sunday, after we did a whole week, that Sunday night, it was a one night only Lewis Black. And so the guy that was the MC got that Sunday off. And they told me that I was going to be the MC and that I would introduce Lynn and then Lynn would introduce Lewis Black. So I went from feature to MC and Lynn went from headliner to feature because it was, you know, one of the biggest stars in the world of comedy, Lewis Black. And he is an absolute killer. Also, much like Nate, one of the nicest guys.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Great guy. Yeah. So it's more about just kind of being on the team at all. It's not so much about like having that title, you know, have you ever headlined is different from are you a headliner?
True.
Because I'm only a headliner depending on who else is in town.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
What is your, I don't know if you still, how you think about being on the road now, if you still love it, but what's your year typically look like? Are you in New York half time and on the road half time? What's it look like and what would you like it to look like?
Yeah. So in my case, it's about 50%. And when I am on the road, I have another interesting career, which is, I don't know if you did the research to find this out or not, but I'm also a semi-professional poker player. And so when I travel to cities that have a casino, I try to ask my manager to time those dates with whenever the big World Poker Tour event or whatever major poker event is at the same time so that I can hopefully play some cards, tell some jokes, maybe play some more cards before I get back on the plane. So if I can combine a comedy trip with a poker trip, then I've got everything I need and I can hopefully make enough money, you know, to cover everything. A lot of times I make more playing cards than they pay me for the jokes, but not always.
The adrenaline.
Yeah, I love that adrenaline. But also having that hobby, I think has maybe saved my life because I've lost a lot of friends over the years to drugs and alcohol. And when I'm on my way to go play poker, that's the last thing I'm going to do is any type of substances because you need to have your wits about you or you're just going to throw your money away. You know, this is a very difficult mental exercise playing this game, especially if the other guys there are going to know how to play. I don't want to be, you know, partaking, if you will. And so in a sense, I think that gambling has kept me off the streets and out of trouble, if you can imagine.
It's a great motivator for sobriety.
Right. Yeah, big time.
Why is it that so many comedians seem to go down that road? I mean, everyone knows the stories of the famous comedians that died. You know, I loved Chris Farley when I was a kid. John Belushi obviously is another famous one. I'm sure you thought a lot about this. What in your mind is causing that in these talented comics that it sounds like you have known some of them?
Yeah. So many great comedians, Mitch Hedberg.
Yeah.
Greg Giraldo died young, you know, it just, I can't really speak to what is going on in somebody else's mind, but to me, it seems like a lot of us comedians, we kind of have demons. There's a dark side to comedy, kind of like the old Italian opera where the clown is actually crying in the mirror, you know. I think there's some of that. And also, in a practical sense, yeah, I mentioned in the beginning, they make you pay to play. And after they stop, they still don't pay you, but they start giving you drink tickets. So you don't have to pay anymore. And we're not going to give you any money. But here's a couple of tickets. Get yourself a couple beers at the bar. And thanks for doing the show. Right? So that's like the next step in comedy. And so you're working in bars. Many times the people that also work in the bar have plenty of other substances. And because you're there performing, they want to show you a good time. How about after the show, we go out and party? And, you know, I never really wanted to. I was like, that sounds great, but where's the poker game? You know, that was my adrenaline. That was my drug of choice, thankfully.
That was your high.
Yeah, that was, yeah. And it is a high. It is very much, you know, that was what I enjoyed more so than just like getting hammered or doing coke or whatever else people do. And, you know, no judgment, because we all need something. Yeah. You know, even little kids, they'll spin around in a circle for 20 minutes to try to get dizzy because they want to feel that, you know, something different. You know, I think it's human nature to want something, but not everybody can handle it and not everybody can stop. And I think that part of being a comedian is having a somewhat compulsive personality. Like, if you're going to stay in this business, you have to kind of be addicted to writing and performing and rewriting and editing and rewriting and deleting and cutting and changing. It's like, you can't just do it once and be like, okay, that was fun. You know, you're not going to make it that way. You've got to be obsessive. And that's, I mean, I think that does kind of, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I think it might go hand in hand with addiction in some ways.
It maps onto an addictive personality.
Yeah, basically. It maps on,
I know you got to go pretty quick, so I want to close with this. You've seen more of this country, I would imagine, than almost anyone in America. What are your favorite few, or more than a few, comedy venues? You've mentioned some today, but I'd love to close on that. What are the great comedy venues most people have never heard of?
Oh, I mean, you'd really be surprised. The Funny Bone in Columbus is amazing. That is such a great club. On Tuesday night, it's like sold out.
Really?
Yeah, that place, Columbus, Ohio, is a really great place. Side Splitters down in Florida is another really great place. I don't want to leave anybody out. I mean, I've been to so many terrific clubs, but there's nothing in the world that compares with doing stand-up comedy on a Saturday night in New York City. It's electric. You know the crowd is going to be tough, but if they love you, they're going to love you. And it's just, you know, I really still get a high just from walking into like a West Side Comedy Club or the Comedy Village in Times Square and just, you know, really having a great time on stage with a New York City audience. It's electric, and it's something that I really love. But globally, I mean, there's a club in Melbourne, Australia that I wish could just be right down the block from me. It's called the Comics Lounge, and that place is magic. The guys who run it, they know exactly how a comedy club should be run. And I haven't been there since before the pandemic, but I've been really wanting to get back. It's just kind of a long trip. Halfway around the world.
Yeah, a little bit. Clayton, thank you so much for making the time, man. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, nice meeting you too. And thanks again for having me on.
Anytime.